Okay, let me start up. And I guess, yeah, microphone's on, everything's good. As I kind of sort of promised last time, I did bring apple fritters for the class. And Director, could you put that up on camera? So you see, if you were here, you would be getting one of those apple fritters. And I had a couple of students ask where they're from. They're from Daylight Donuts, which is on Main Street here in Gainesville. I have a particular fondness for these apple fritters. The last 2.5 years or so as an undergrad, I was working during the day, working from 8 to 4:25. Then I was driving an hour out to where I was going to school, at a miserable school at the time called Cal State Hayward. And I was spending from 6 to 10 out there, then I was driving an hour back to get to where I lived. So I knew I wasn't going to have dinner until after class. I was around 11:30. On the way out, I would stop at what was called a Winchell's Donut, which was a chain in California, and they had apple fritters, very, very, very similar to these Daylight Donut apple fritters. So I really have a thing for this particular apple fritter. I think it's quite good, and I guess you guys are going to agree, especially given it was free. Okay, so with that, if you want to attend class, I really do urge you to attend. There are 35 students in the class who are supposed to be here in Gainesville because you're taking your tests on campus. And then there are another, golly, I don't know, 280 or so who are off campus, but some of you I expect will spend some time in Gainesville. If you're here in Gainesville, come to class, okay? I don't promise you an apple fritter every time, but you never can tell what'll happen. So try to get to class. Now, want to talk about Chapter 5, allocative efficiency. And let me refresh your memory what we're talking about here. Remember the PPF? And the deal with the PPF is that all points on the PPF are production efficient, but they're not all equally desirable. So the goal that we have in Chapter 5 is to try to figure out which one of these points on the PPF is the most desirable from a social perspective. And again, I emphasize this from a social perspective. We're going to take account of both consumers and producers. We're not just going to focus in on consumers. We're not just going to focus in on producers. We're going to merge the two, if you will, and look at it overall. What is the best from a social perspective? And somebody just came in. Okay, you're expected to take one of those, all right? And to do this, we're going to use a tool called marginal analysis. Marginal analysis is a way of making decisions, and it's a really powerful way to make decisions. Frankly, from my perspective, it's the only way that makes sense when it comes to thinking about making a decision. Do I want to do this, or do I want to do that, or do I want to do this at all, okay? And what does marginal analysis say? Well, it comes in two parts. Here's the first part, here's the second part. And I can read this to you. You can read it also. Let me read just the first part. The marginal benefit of an action is greater than the marginal cost of the action, then do the action. Now, the issue here is, I think what I've got highlighted in orange, the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. You know, what do I mean by marginal benefit? What do I mean by marginal cost? Well, marginal benefit of an action, this is the benefit that you get from the particular action you're looking at. Marginal cost is the cost of the particular action you're looking at. So let's take the director as an example. Okay, suppose the director is at Daylight Donuts, which I expect he knows where it is. He probably has it on his speed dial and certainly knows how to get there. And let's suppose that he's already consumed 3 apple fritters. So he's had 3 apple fritters, and he's thinking about, do I want a 4th apple fritter? Okay, so this is his decision. This is the action he's thinking about. Do I want to buy and eat a 4th apple fritter? Well, I don't recall precisely how much the apple fritters cost, but let's say it's $2 per fritter. Okay, first of all, the marginal cost is just the cost of the action we're looking at. The action we're looking at is the 4th apple fritter. So the cost of the 4th apple fritter is $2. It's not the cost of all apple fritters. It's not 4 times 2 is $8. That's his total cost if he eats 4 apple fritters. It's not $6. You know, that's what he spent on the first 3 apple fritters. So the marginal cost of that 4th apple fritter is $2. Now the marginal benefit, we want to look at the benefit from just the 4th apple fritter. It's not the benefit from all 4. Okay, he's thinking about, I've already eaten 3, I just, you know, do I want to eat the 4th? So we have to look at what is the benefit from the 4th apple fritter. And so he's going to have some way of measuring the benefit to himself of this 4th apple fritter. And he can look at the cost of that apple fritter. So this, whatever the marginal benefit is from that, just the 4th apple fritter, not all 4, just the 4th, he's going to compare that to the cost of the 4th apple fritter, the marginal cost, just the cost of the 4th, not all 4. And then if the marginal benefit he gets from that apple fritter is greater than the marginal cost, he's going to buy and eat that apple fritter. And of course he will, okay, because I think he slows down around the 7th or 8th apple fritter, right, Director?
On a slow day.
Yeah, on a slow day. So the deal here is that's what the marginal benefit is. It's the benefit of the action by itself. In this case, it's the 4th apple fritter. And the marginal cost is the cost of the action itself. And in this case, it's the cost of the 4th apple fritter. So that's what we mean by marginal benefit and marginal cost. And when you think about it that way, I think it makes a great deal of sense. So you're looking and saying, I get some benefit from this action. What is the benefit I get from this action? And this action is going to cost me something. There's going to be at least an opportunity cost to this action. Okay, so what does this action cost me? What is the cost from this action? And then you're going to compare the two. The benefit that you get from the action exceeds the cost you get from the action, then you're going to do it. And on the other hand, if the cost of the action exceeds the benefit of the action, you won't do it. All right, that's all that marginal analysis says. So we want to use marginal analysis to figure out what is the best amount of a product to produce from a social perspective. And there's a question, yeah.
What's the difference between a marginal cost and opportunity?
Good question. Question is, what's the difference between a marginal cost and an opportunity cost? A marginal cost is one type of opportunity cost. Okay, so I could look at the opportunity cost of the 4th apple fritter. I'm putting it in terms of dollars. It's $2. But in truth, we know it's not $2. It's whatever he would have done with that $2. You know, maybe he would have bought a donut with the $2, or maybe he would have bought hash browns somewhere with the $2. You know, I don't in particular know what he's going to do with it. So we'll just keep it in terms of $2 right here, knowing that it's the opportunity cost is what he's going to buy with that $2. If I look at all 4 apple fritters, I can say, what's the total opportunity cost of buying all 4? And that's $8. Okay, so you can think of like mammal. That's the same as opportunity cost. Then you can think about specific types of mammals like cat. Okay, so you can think about opportunity cost, and you can think about this specific type of opportunity cost, the marginal cost. So is that a good answer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now, in order to use this to figure out what is the best amount of a product to produce and consume from a social perspective, I've got to get the marginal benefit from the product, and I've got to get the marginal cost of the product. So let's think about the marginal benefit to begin with. And let me erase this right here. And here. Let's think about a demand curve. And the reason why I'm thinking about a demand curve is when I think about who benefits from a product. You know, let's think about pizza, not apple fritters. You know, let's think about who benefits when someone buys a pizza from Paisanos. Let's say when you're kind of looking at me. Okay, so when she buys a pizza from Paisanos, who benefits from the pizza? You might say, well, it's Paisanos because, you know, they get her money. I said, no. We have to ask who benefits from the pizza. We're going to look at the pizza. Who benefits from the pizza? Well, she's the one who benefits from the pizza. She's the one who consumes the pizza, so she's going to get the benefit from the pizza. So that leads me to think, okay, let's think about the demand curve. Because the demand is showing us the people who are going to buy it. The demand is showing us the people who are going to benefit from this. And what we've done with the demand curve to this point is we've always picked a price right here, P, and then from that price we go over to the demand curve, and we come down here, and here's a quantity Q right here. And we say at this price right here, P, and let me set a price. Let's suppose this price is $14 for a pizza. Then the quantity demanded might be, let's say, 100 pizzas, per day here in Gainesville. So we say at $14, here is the quantity that's demanded. I could equally well, however, go from this quantity here up to the demand curve and then go over to the price. And so now what is that price, $14? What does that price represent? Well, this price right here, this $14, this is the maximum price the consumer of the, and notice I'm saying the 100th pizza is willing to pay. Okay, and let's say that she's the person who's buying this 100th pizza right here. This is the most she's willing to pay for that pizza. Okay, if the price was more than $14, she would not be willing to buy that pizza. Now, she'd love to buy it for less than $14, but the $14, that's the maximum price that she is willing to pay for that pizza. So now, okay, what does that mean? Well, what's this maximum price, $14? Well, this maximum price, $14, this is going to be the value of the 100th pizza to the person who buys it. So this is the value of that pizza to the consumer. Now, how do I know that's the value to the consumer? Well, think about it this way. Suppose she valued it at more than $14. Suppose she valued the pizza at $15. Well, then she'd be willing to pay more than $14 for it. If you value something at $15, you'd be willing to pay more than $14 for it. You'd be willing to pay $14.50 for it. You'd be willing to pay $14.75 for it, okay? You'd be willing to pay up to $15 if you valued it at $15. But the deal is she's not willing to pay more than $14. Okay, so that says that she can't value it more than $14. Could she value it for less than $14? Could she value it maybe $9? Well, no. I mean, if you value something at less than 14, you're not going to be willing to pay 14. If you only value it at $9, it'd be ludicrous to pay $14 for it. So she has to value it at least $14 because she's willing to pay 14. And she can't value it more than 14 because she's not willing to pay more than 14. So this is the value to her of that 100th pizza. And notice it's just that 100th pizza. It's not all 100. She's not buying all 100 pizzas. She's just buying that pizza in particular right there. So this is the value to the consumer of that pizza. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this is the marginal benefit of the 100th pizza, and now I'll say to the consumer of that pizza. And this will be, I'll have MB down here. This is her marginal benefit. So what I'm doing is I am using her values. Okay, I'm using her value right here, her value of $14 to say that's the benefit to her. Okay, I'm not imposing my values at all here. I'm using her values, and that makes sense to me, right? I don't want to be a dictator and say, well, I think this pizza should be worth this much to whoever consumes it. And I don't know. I don't want to do that. I want to use the people's values themselves. And then we'll say that's her benefit from the pizza. That makes sense. This is how much she values it. This is what the benefit is that she gets from that pizza. And notice again, I'm using the persons. I'm using the people within the society. I'm using their values as their benefits. So this is the benefit, the MB to the consumer of the pizza. And now when I think about this from a social perspective, she's a member of society. Society is benefiting because, you know, she's consuming this pizza. How much does society benefit? Well, she's the only person who benefits from this, okay? That if she buys a pizza and she eats the pizza by herself, she is the only person who's benefiting from that pizza. And so this then will be the benefit to society. This will be the, because she's part of society, this will be the marginal social benefit of the 100th pizza, or the MSB of that 100th pizza. So here, let me just run through this again very quickly, you know, so we can see what I did. I picked a quantity right here, this 100, and I went up and over to this price, $14. And so that $14, that's the maximum price the consumer of this pizza is willing to pay. Okay, they're not willing to pay more than $14. They're willing to pay less, but they're not willing to pay more. So this is the highest price they're willing to pay. Well, that means that this $14, that's the value to the person of that pizza. Why is it the value? Well, if they valued it more than 14, they'd be willing to pay more than 14, but they're not. If they valued it less than 14, they wouldn't be willing to pay 14, but they are. So that says that this has to be the value. This $14 is the value to the consumer of this 100th pizza. I'm going to say that's equal to their marginal benefit. And so this is the benefit that's going to the consumer of that pizza. And that's why I've got the MB down here. And the person who consumes that pizza, they're part of society. So the benefit to society is the benefit to that individual from that pizza. So this $14 then is the marginal social benefit, the benefit to society of that 100th pizza. So is that okay? You guys okay with that? Is that good? Is that all right? That's clear? So look, here is the marginal social benefit of the 100th pizza. Suppose I came over here and this, I put down Q tilde, and let's say this is the 300th, or the 300th pizza. I'd come up to this curve here, I'd come over here, and this P tilde, let's say this is $9, that'd be the benefit to the person of the 300th pizza. And what you can see here, and I'll talk about this in just a second, is that as the quantity goes up, we go from 100 to 300, the maximum price the person is willing to pay goes down. That means that the value is going down. That means that the marginal benefit to the individual is decreasing. And with the marginal benefit to the individual decreasing, this means that the marginal benefit to society, the marginal social benefit, is decreasing. And you might ask, well, wait, aren't you better off, you know, with 300 pizzas than 100 pizzas? The answer is, yeah, in total, you're better off. Okay, let's suppose that this is her first pizza and this is her second pizza this week, all right? So for the first pizza this week, she hasn't had pizza for a while. She really benefits from that pizza. If you have a pizza the next day, you know, you're tired of pizza and you go, oh, okay, you know, I get some benefit from it, but it's less. So the benefit from her second pizza is going to be less than the benefit from her first pizza. Her total benefit is more. Okay, your total benefit from having 2 pizzas is greater than your benefit from having just 1. But the extra benefit from the second pizza, that's the marginal benefit from the second pizza, is less than the benefit from the first pizza. And you just see, you know, you get tired of eating pizza, 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 so that the marginal benefit is going to be decreasing as you have more and more and more pizzas. So is that okay? Does that make sense? Is that okay? So then this curve right here, this curve is not only a demand curve, but we can use this curve also to determine what the marginal social benefit is. Okay, as a demand curve, we typically use it by picking a price and seeing how much is the quantity demanded. As a marginal social benefit curve, we pick a quantity, and then we can see what is the benefit of that unit to the individual, and then more importantly, what is the benefit of that unit to society, the marginal social benefit. So that's okay, that's all right? Questions on that? Director, you're okay with that? I know I shouldn't be using food examples because that runs the risk of you drooling and breaking the equipment back there, but.
I mean, I'm counting down the minutes to my lunch break, so.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so that's half of what I need for marginal analysis. I've got the marginal benefit part of it. Now I need the marginal cost part of it. So I had a great deal of success here, I think, looking at the demand curve for the marginal benefit. Let me then do something sort of symmetric. Let's look at the supply curve and think about the marginal social cost. So here's the price, here's the quantity, here is my supply. Let's say this is supply of pizza again. And typically, as we've used the supply curve, we've picked a price, and let's say, here is the price right here, P. That's it. Let's get the price up higher. Here's the price here, P. And let's suppose this is $16. And we go from that price over here, and we come down, and suppose this is 600 pizzas in a day. Okay, so we say at a price of $16, the quantity supply is going to be 600 pizzas. But we equally well could go from the 600 up here to this curve, come over here to this price right here, and now we ask, what is that price then? What's the price that we have there? Well, this price, this is the minimum price the producer of the 600th pizza is willing to accept for the 600th pizza. In other words, let's suppose this is Paisano's that is making this pizza. So they're the ones that are making this pizza. The lowest price at which they'll produce this pizza is $16. If the price was any lower, they wouldn't be willing to produce that pizza. So this is the minimum price that they're going to be willing to accept for that 600th pizza, that one pizza by itself. Now look, again, they'd be eager to get more. They'd be happy to get more. But I'm interested right now in what the $16 is. And the $16 is the absolute lowest price that they would take, they would accept to produce that 600th pizza. Now, we have to ask, what pegs the price? What pegs the price at $16? Well, Paisano's is in business to make a profit. That's why the owners of Paisano's run their businesses. They want to make a profit. That's their income. So they are going to be willing to produce a pizza as long as the money that they get for the pizza, the price they get for the pizza, covers all the costs of producing the pizza. In other words, pays for the cost of the pepperoni, pays for the price of the cheese used on the pizza, the tomato sauce used on the pizza, the dough used on the pizza, the workers who produce the pizza, pays for their costs, plus gives them a small bit of profit. And we'll see later on that small bit of profit we really want to think of as another cost, because this is a cost that we've got to pay the owners of Paisano's in order to have them open and selling pizza. So that they're willing to produce this pizza for $16 as long as it covers the cost plus that little bit of profit of producing the pizza. So this right here, this $16, this then is equal to the marginal cost of the 600th pizza to the producer, Paisano's, of the 600th pizza. And that'll be MC, indicating that's the marginal cost. That is the cost to the company of producing that pizza. And so the idea here is that if the cost exceeded $16 of that 600th pizza, the marginal cost was greater than $16, they wouldn't be willing to produce it. It'd be a loser pizza for them. If the marginal cost of the pizza was less than $16, they'd be willing to produce it for less than $16. Okay, they'd prefer not to, but they'd be willing to produce it for less than 16 if it costs them less than 16 to produce it, but they're not. Okay, the lowest price they're willing to accept for it is $16. So that tells me that has to be the cost to the producer. The Paisanos, that pizza is costing Paisanos $16 to produce. And when I think about it, okay, that Paisanos is the entity, if you will, within society that is producing that pizza. So the cost to society of producing the pizza is the cost that Paisanos incurs. This then is going to be the marginal social cost to society of the 600th pizza. So this will be my MSC. That'll be my marginal social cost. So let me run this through again. Okay, we picked up pizza here, 600. We went up, we went over. And we see that $16 is the price that's associated with that. Well, when we look here, this is the minimum price Paisanos is willing to accept to produce this pizza. If the price was lower than $16, they wouldn't be producing it. Okay, if the price is down here, you're not going to get that pizza being produced. They'd love to get a higher price, but 16 is the lowest price which they'll produce the pizza. So what pins that price is their marginal cost. What is the cost to Paisanos of producing that 600th pizza? Okay, and $16 is going to equal that marginal cost. Because if the marginal costs were any higher than $16, they wouldn't be willing to produce it. It'd be a loser. They wouldn't make a profit on it. So if the marginal cost is higher than $16, they're not producing it. If the marginal cost is lower than $16, but let me back off that. If it's higher than 16, they're not producing it. But we know they're producing it. So the marginal cost can't be higher than 16 because we know they're producing it. If it was less than $16, say it was $14 to produce it, they'd be willing to sell for $15. But they're not. Okay, they're not willing to sell for less than 16. So if the marginal cost was any lower than 16, they'd be willing to sell for less than 16, but they're not. So that tells me the marginal cost can't be lower than 16. So the marginal cost can't be lower and it can't be higher. It's got to be $16. So the marginal cost of Paisanos of producing the pizza is $16. And Paisanos is the one that's paying the cost. The group within society that pays the cost to produce it is Paisanos. So that's the cost to society, the marginal social cost to society. So is that okay? You guys good with that? Is that okay? And now, look, we can do the same thing we did over here. Okay, I can pick another pizza right here. Let's say this is 200 pizzas. We come up, we go over. Here's this price. We'll call this Q tilde. Here's the price P tilde, and let's say this is $8. So then this $8 right here, that's the lowest price that Paisanos will accept for this pizza. Okay, and so this is the marginal cost of the pizza. That's the marginal social cost. So what I see here is, look, let's go from Q tilde to Q. Okay, as the quantity increases as we go out here, what do I see? Well, as the quantity increases, what I see is that the marginal cost is increasing, which means the marginal social cost is increasing. But actually, we've seen this before. We've seen right here before, and this comes to the question that you asked me about how's marginal cost compared to opportunity cost. We saw here what we call the law of increasing opportunity cost when we moved along the PPF. And the law of increasing opportunity cost said that as the quantity of a product you produce along the PPF increases, the opportunity cost of another unit is increasing. We saw that with the machines and the gumballs. As we produce more and more and more gumballs, the opportunity cost of an additional gumball increased. Well, it's the opportunity cost of an additional gumball. That's a marginal a marginal gumball. So this opportunity cost of the additional gumball, that's the marginal cost of one more gumball. So this law of increasing opportunity cost is just what we see right here. As you produce more of a product, the cost of an additional unit increases. The marginal cost of that additional unit is increasing. So the total cost also obviously increases as you produce more. But what we're really interested in is the marginal cost. So this curve right here also, if you will, leads two lives. It's not only a marginal, it's not only a supply curve, but it's also a marginal social cost curve. If I want to get the marginal social cost of any pizza, I just go from here up to the curve and I go over, and that gives me the marginal social cost. So is that okay? You guys good with that? Is that okay? Because now I've got what I need to use marginal analysis. I've got my marginal social benefit over here. I guess I could label this. Here I've got my marginal social benefit, and over here I've got my marginal social cost. So the next step is to put the two together. Okay, so I'm putting the two together, and when I put the two together, leave yourself some space beneath the diagram. I'm going to have a couple of things I keep track of beneath the diagram. So here is the price. That's also the marginal social benefit. It's also the marginal social cost. Here's the quantity. Here is going to be my demand, and that's my marginal social benefit curve. Here is my, and actually let me change this around a bit. This is my marginal social benefit curve, and that's equal to the demand curve. I'm going to put that in parentheses because I don't need that right now. Here is my marginal social cost curve, and that's also equal to the supply, and that's in parentheses because I don't need it right now. And now what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to put, the first thing I'm going to have here is, and this is an awkward phrasing, it's the surplus of benefit minus cost of the unit. That's the first thing I'm going to put down here. And the second thing I'm going to put down here is going to be what we call the total surplus of benefit minus cost of all the units. As when I said, look, this is kind of awkward phrasing because it's got this word surplus in it. We've seen surplus before. If the price was above the equilibrium price, we had a surplus of the product. Okay, we talked about if the price is above the equilibrium price, there's a surplus of the product. Price is going to fall. That'll eliminate the surplus of the product. Surplus of a product is a bad thing. You don't want that. Okay, but this is an entirely different surplus. This is the benefit minus the cost, okay? This is a good thing. I mean, if you benefit 100 and it only costs you 10, that gives you 90 bucks of benefit, over and above the cost of producing this product. So this is a good thing. We want to get the maximum total surplus we can get. Okay, we want the maximum surplus because that's going to make society as well off as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply marginal analysis here. I'm going to look, say, at the first pizza. So here's pizza number 1. And I'm going to ask, from a social perspective, do I want to produce that pizza? And what I've got to do is I've got to compare. What is the benefit to society of that pizza versus what is the cost to society of the pizza? Now, the benefit of the pizza exceeds the cost of the pizza. We want to do it. If the benefit of the pizza falls short of the pizza, we don't want to do it. So here, what is the benefit of pizza number 1 to society? What's the marginal social benefit? Well, come up here to the marginal social benefit curve, come over, and suppose this is $20. Okay, so society is going to benefit $20 from that pizza. In other words, somebody in society is willing to pay $20 for that pizza. And that's going to end up being their benefit. That's going to end up being the benefit to society. And let's suppose that the marginal social cost is up to here. Let's suppose this is $2. There's a company in the economy that is willing to produce this pizza for $2. That's their marginal cost, is $2. So from a social perspective, do I want to produce the pizza? Well, society is going to benefit $20, and it's going to cost society only $2. So we have a surplus of benefit minus cost. We have a surplus right here of this much right in here. That's our surplus of benefit minus cost, and that's $18. We're going to get $18 of surplus over and above the cost of producing this product. So the surplus on that one unit is $18, and the surplus on all the units, it's only the one, is $18. So, okay, we definitely want to produce that pizza. Marginal analysis tells us we want to produce that pizza. Okay, now how about pizza number 2? Okay, here's pizza number 2. Well, for pizza number 2, look, here will be the marginal social benefit. Suppose that's $18. What's the marginal social cost? Well, suppose that's $4. So society is going to benefit $18 if we produce that pizza. It's going to cost society $4 to produce the pizza. So if I look at this from a social perspective, yeah, we want to produce the pizza. It's like a no-brainer. We want to produce the pizza. We're going to get $18 worth of benefit. And it's only going to cost us $4 to get that $18 worth of benefit. We're going to have a surplus of benefit minus cost of this much right here. We'll have a surplus on that pizza of $14. And you might say, well, wait a minute, do you want to maximize your surplus? And we see the surplus is going down here. But the issue is, it's a surplus on that unit. I want to maximize my total surplus. So if I produce 2 pizzas, my surplus on the first is 18, plus I get 14 on the second. My total surplus now is $32. So clearly, from a social perspective, I'm better off by producing 2 pizzas than 1 pizza. My total surplus has increased. Okay, and what you can see is that as long as the marginal social benefit exceeds the marginal social cost, that's going to have a surplus that's positive, that we're going to get more surplus than it costs us to produce it. And so we want to produce. We want to produce all of the units where the marginal social benefit exceeds the marginal social cost, because all of those units are going to create a surplus of extra benefit over and above the cost. So let's look where these 2 curves cross right here, Q. And this is where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. Suppose I think about producing Q, okay? If I produce Q, that means that I will have produced all of the units up to and including Q. We've produced all of those units. Is that something I'd want to do? Well, yeah. Because if you look here, for each and every one of the units, the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal social cost. Sometimes it's a lot, okay, and sometimes here it's only a little, but it's still, the marginal social benefit is always greater than the marginal social cost. So if I produce a Q, I've produced all of the good units, if you will, all the units, all the pizzas with marginal social benefit greater than marginal social cost. I've produced all the units that give us a net benefit. Okay, after I subtract the cost off, I still end up with a benefit. Now, if I produce Q, that also means that I've produced none of the units that lie beyond it. So none of these are being produced. Is that a good thing to do? Is that a good thing to produce none of those units that lie beyond it? Well, okay, if I look at the units that lie beyond it, pick any unit. Pick this one right here. For this unit right here, here is the marginal social benefit. Up here is the marginal social cost. That unit costs us more to produce than we get a benefit from it. You know, it could be that the cost is $17 and the benefit's only $5. Okay, if something costs you $17, but you only get $5 worth of benefit from it, that's a loser. You don't want to do that. So we definitely don't want to produce any of the units where the marginal social cost exceeds the marginal social benefit. If we stop at Q, we produce none of these. We've produced none of the units with marginal social benefit less than marginal social cost. We've produced none of the loser units. So that tells me that I've got the maximum possible total surplus. That my total surplus of all of the benefits added up minus all of the costs added up is as large as possible at Q right here, because I've produced all the units that add to my total surplus. I produce none of the units that subtract from my total surplus. So this Q right here, this is called the allocatively efficient quantity. That is telling us that we have allocated the correct amount of resources to producing, in this case, pizza. That this is the production, this is the amount of pizza that is making society as well off as possible, that is giving society the maximum surplus of benefit, total benefit minus total cost. Now, let me head off a couple of questions that I get asked. One question I get asked is, why do you produce where marginal social benefit equals marginal social cost? Because that doesn't add anything to your surplus. And I've got a couple of answers to that. One is, yeah, it doesn't add anything, but as it subtracts, so why not? That's an answer. It's not the best answer. Here's the better answer. Okay, you're asking what I produce here. Give me an alternative. Okay, alternative means I'm going to produce more, I'm going to produce less. Let's see how those alternatives work out. Well, if I produce more, well, then I'm producing some loser units. I'm producing units that are going to subtract from my total surplus. I want to get the maximum surplus I possibly can get. Okay, if I produce any loser surplus, any loser units, my surplus is lower. So I can't produce more because I'm going to be producing loser units. It's going to cost me surplus. All right, could I produce less? Well, if I produce less, then I'll be passing up some units that would add to my surplus. Okay, I'm not collecting all the surplus possible because I'm not producing all the units that have a surplus. That means my total surplus is lower if I produce less. So if I produce more, my total surplus is lower. If I produce less, my total surplus is lower. That tells me that this is the maximum right here. Okay, you can think of this as like a mountain. Right. Here is the total surplus. Here is the quantity, and it looks something like this. Right here is Q. This is the allocatively efficient quantity. Okay, and this is where your total surplus is at its maximum. If you produced more, your total surplus will be lower. If you produce less, your total surplus will be lower. So this is where the total surplus is at its maximum, right here, where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. And this isn't really a question, this is now a comment, something for you to know. This is called the allocatively efficient quantity. Unfortunately, almost always, economists, and I'm an economist, will abbreviate this and we'll just call it the efficient quantity. Okay, this is different than the production efficient quantities. The production efficient quantities are all of the points on the PPF. This is the one sole point that is allocatively efficient, the one point that gives us the maximum possible total surplus of benefit minus cost. Okay, So the allocatively efficient amount is different than the production efficient amount. So production efficient amounts are all the points on the PPF. This allocatively efficient amount is just 1 point on the PPF. However, when I talk about this, I will generally just say, what's the efficient quantity? What's the efficient amount? If I want to talk about the points on the PPF, then I'll say, what's the production efficient amount? So if I'm saying just efficient, it means the allocatively efficient amount. If I want to talk about the PPF, I'm going to be saying the production efficient amount. All right, one last point to make. We could ask, what is the total surplus here? And we could actually figure out what the total surplus is. I mean, the total surplus is a triangle right here. So let's say that this allocatively efficient amount, let's say this is 1,000 pizzas. And let's say this point right here where this intersects is $1. And this point where this intersects up here, let's say it's $21. Formula for the area of a triangle. Area of a triangle is, you probably remember, is 1/2 the base times the height. That's the formula for the area of a triangle. So that means it's going to be 1/2 the base is 1,000. So it's 1/2 1,000 times the height. And the height of the triangle is this distance right here. It's 21 minus $1, or that's $20. So it's times $20. So that would equal $10,000. That'd be my total surplus. It's the area of here, this triangle right there. So the total surplus is the area of the triangle that we see right there. And again, you know, if you had numbers, 21, 1, 1,000, you could actually figure it out by using the formula for the area of a triangle. So is that okay? Is that all right? Look, this is a lot. So let me pause and ask. Questions? No questions? Okay, remember, you guys have to be asking questions for everybody else in the class. Okay, there are about 350 kids. There are 4 of you. So that means each of you is like 90 students. So you have to ask questions for 90 students. You covered your 90. So you're sipping for 90 students? Yeah. Okay. No questions over there? All right, now, let me make a point here. And this is something that I think is literally amazing. And this is what we call the idea of the invisible hand. Look right, let me come over here and let me redraw this, because I've got so much crud on that board. Here's the price. Here is my marginal social benefit. And remember, I said that's equal to the demand. I put it in parentheses. Let me take it out of parentheses now. Here's the marginal social cost. I said that was equal to the supply. Here's the quantity. Here is the allocatively efficient amount, QEFF for the efficient amount. This is where the marginal social benefit curve crosses the marginal social cost curve. Okay, now let's ask ourselves, what is the quantity that's actually going to be produced in this market? And we go back to chapter 3, right? The quantity that's produced is where the demand curve and the supply curve cross. That's right here. This is going to be the equilibrium quantity. That's where the demand and the supply curves cross. What you can see here is what I think is really an amazing and crucially important result. The allocatively efficient amount is the same as the equilibrium amount. That the amount that is produced by people looking out for their self-interest is the same as the allocatively efficient amount. What do I mean by people looking for their self-interest? Well, when we think about the demand for pizza, I had pizza for dinner a couple of nights ago. And I can tell you, when I was thinking about how much pizza do I want to order, do I want to get pizza, I didn't think, what would society want me to do? You know, would society want me to order a small pizza, a medium pizza, or a large pizza? What does society want me to do? I didn't give a rat's rump about society. I said, you know, how hungry am I? Do I want to get a big pizza, or a small pizza, or a medium pizza? All I was thinking about is myself. You go over to Paisanos and you walk around at lunch and you ask people, when you made your decision about what to order, did you think about what society wanted you to do? People are going to look at you like you're crazy. Nobody thinks about what society wants them to do. They think about what's in it for me. What do I care about? Okay, what is my marginal benefit from the product? That's what I care about. Okay, and so too for the suppliers. I don't know the owners of Paisanos, but even though I don't know them, I can guarantee you they don't wake up every morning, you know, at 6 a.m. and lie in bed racked with doubt and say, how much pizza does society want me to produce today? No, they don't give a rat's rump about what society wants. What they care about is how much profit are they going to make? What is the most profitable amount of pizza for me to produce? Okay, that's what they care about, is what are the costs that I have to pay? What is the revenue that I get? What is the most profitable amount for me to produce? So suppliers are looking out for their own self-interest. Demanders are looking out for their own self-interest. But as Adam Smith put it, people who pursue only their self-interest are nonetheless led, as if by an invisible hand, to advance the social interest. That this right here is based only on people's private interests. Nobody gives one rat's rump about what's good for society when they're thinking about how much to buy. Nobody gives one rat's rump for society when they're thinking about how much to sell. They're thinking about only themselves, but nonetheless thinking about only yourself, only your selfish own interests, only your own greed. That nonetheless leads you to produce the amount that is best for society. So what this says is that we don't need any intervention in here. We don't need any government intervening, trying to change stuff around here. That what we're producing right here is the amount that's best for society. This capitalist society has channeled people's self-interested decisions into advancing the social interest right here. That's what Adam Smith said back in 1776. And this was publicized in his book, Wealth of Nations, published on March 7th, 1776, which is, of course, a really important year for the United States, as we all know. But it was immediately realized to be a crucially important result, and basically founded the science of economics. Prior to this, thinkers had thought, well, mercantilism is how you should organize an economy. That the more gold the economy has, the better off the society is. And Smith said, no, that's not right. We want to think about this from an individual perspective. We want to think about what's good for the individuals, what's good for the individual buyers, what's good for the individual sellers. And he had this incredibly advanced idea of the invisible hand. Now, he didn't draw these diagrams or anything such as this. Supply and demand diagrams actually didn't come along for another 130 years. But nonetheless, I mean, this is what Smith was thinking about. Now, let me very quickly hasten to add, we're going to later on see instances where the equilibrium amount is not the same as the allocatively efficient amount. But in general, nonetheless, this is just such a striking result that something you guys should be aware of. So is that okay? You guys good with that? Is that okay? That's okay? Yeah.
How come the marginal social cost and benefit lines don't touch the x-axis?
Oh, the question is, why don't the marginal social cost, marginal social benefit lines touch the x-axis? I mean, they could. You might also ask, why are they straight? And they're straight because they're easy to draw. They don't touch the x-axis because I just don't keep drawing them down. This right here, touching the x-axis would say that, you're willing to produce some at zero price. That seems sort of odd. So I don't think the supply curve would ever really touch the x-axis. This will probably touch the x-axis at some point, because after you get 20 billion pizzas, nobody's going to want another pizza, so the price you're willing to pay is zero. So I draw them as straight. And look, because they're straight, I can use the formula for the triangle. If it's not straight, then you'd have to integrate the area. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Okay, he took care of his 90. Okay, so I need questions from you too. Half the class is covered. Okay. I mean, you ate an apple fritter for your 90 students. Okay, so you could ask questions for the 90 students. Okay, now I've got the total surplus. The total surplus, as we saw, is this area in here. Here's my total surplus right here. And we might ask, now, who gets this total surplus right there? And that's what I want to tackle next, is who gets that total surplus? And to tackle it, I need some more board space. So I can erase this, right? You guys are okay if this goes away? And oh, director, we got a new director back there. He snuck in, tried to sneak in. You came late, didn't you? You were late, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw the usual director back there. He was licking the side of the glass there. He was so hungry.
Yeah, he almost ate my mom.
Okay, now, how do we divide up this surplus? Some of the surplus is going to go to consumers. Some of the surplus is going to go to producers. Let's start with what goes to consumers. This is what we call the consumer surplus. Okay, so here, I've got everything up on the PowerPoint all at one time. Here is going to be the quantity. Here's going to be the price. Here's my demand curve. And that's the marginal social benefit. Here is my supply curve. That's the marginal social cost. We know this is the equilibrium quantity because it's where the demand and supply curves cross. It's also the allocatively efficient quantity because that's where the marginal social benefit and the marginal social cost curves cross. Now, I haven't mentioned the price at all up to this. Price, equilibrium price didn't play a role at all. But we need the equilibrium price to see how the surplus gets divided. So here will be the equilibrium price, PEQ. Now, the consumer surplus is noting the following. Let's look at this pizza right here. Here's pizza number 1. Somebody is willing to pay this much. And let's say this is, again, what price did I use over there? I used $20. Let's say this is $20. And the equilibrium price is 11. Somebody is willing to pay $20 for it. They don't have to pay 20. They only have to pay 11. So from their standpoint, they say, wow, I'm really hungry. I'd be willing to pay up to $20 for it, but I only have to pay 11. I get a surplus. Okay, my benefit is $20 worth of benefit, but I only have to pay 11. So I have a surplus of benefit over what it costs me, what I have to pay for it, of $9. So I would have right here a consumer surplus of 20 minus 11 equals $9. So I've got my consumer surplus on that unit. Okay, for unit number 2, somebody's willing to pay $18 for that. But they don't have to pay 18, they only have to pay 11. So I've got a consumer surplus on that of 18 minus 11 of $7 right there. All the units up to here have a consumer surplus, okay? So the total consumer surplus is the area of this triangle right in here. So here's my total consumer surplus. It's the area of that triangle right there. It's the difference between the maximum amount the consumer is willing to pay, and we get that maximum amount from this, the demand curve, minus the amount they actually have to pay, which is the equilibrium price right there. So it's the difference between the maximum price the consumer is willing to pay minus the actual price they're willing to pay. So is that okay? Can you guys see that okay? Is that okay? Is that all right? So when we think about the big surplus, the total surplus is this big triangle right in here. This triangle right here, triangle underneath the demand curve and above the price, That's the consumer surplus. That's the amount of the total surplus that goes to the consumer. All right. But we've got this bottom triangle down there, and that's going to wind up going to the producer. This is what we call producer surplus. Let me get that. And here, let me actually put this in. This will be my consumer surplus. Okay, for the producer surplus, here's how you want to think about it. Look at pizza number 1. There's a company out there that's willing to produce this pizza. Let's say it's Paisano's. They produce that pizza for $2. But they're going to get more than $2 when they sell it. They're going to get $11. So they'd be willing to produce it if they could get $2, but they're going to get $11. So they get a surplus of 11 minus 2. They get a producer surplus of this amount right in here. Here's my producer surplus, and that is equal to the price they actually received, $12, minus the minimum price they would have accepted. Whoops, that's $11. The minimum price they would have accepted is $2. They get a surplus. You can think of this as added profit, if you will, of $9. So they get here this producer surplus, which is roughly speaking an added profit over and above what they would get for $2. They get $9 of extra added profit. When I look at pizza number 2, okay, there's some company out there, this might be Pizza Hut, would be willing to produce that pizza for $4, but they're not going to get just $4, they're going to get $11. They get a surplus, added profit of that much right in there. They would get a surplus of 11 minus 4 is $7 on that pizza. And when you look at all of these pizzas up here, they get all of them have a producer surplus. And so the total producer surplus would be the area of this triangle down in here. So the area of that triangle right there, that's my producer surplus. Oops. So what I've done is I've taken my total surplus and I've divided it up. My total surplus is equal to the sum of the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. So what I've done here is I've divided this up, the surplus, into the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. So is that okay? Can you see that? Is that okay? Now in both the PowerPoint and my diagram right here, it looks like the producer surplus and the consumer surplus are the same. They don't have to be the same. Okay, let me show you. Let me draw 2 very quick diagrams here. Here I'm going to have a flat demand curve like this, marginal social benefit curve, and a steep supply curve or marginal social cost curve like that. So here is the equilibrium quantity, which is the same as allocatively efficient quantity. Here is the equilibrium price, PEQ. So in this case, the consumer surplus is this smaller triangle up here. There's my consumer surplus right there. But my producer surplus is much bigger. My producer surplus is the area of this much larger triangle down here. So there's my producer surplus. So in this case, the producer surplus is bigger than the consumer surplus. Or look, I can just kind of switch that around. QP. I could have a steep demand, marginal social benefit curve, a flat supply, marginal social cost curve. Here is the equilibrium quantity, same as allocatively efficient quantity. Here is the equilibrium price. Okay, the consumer surplus, area under the demand curve and above the price, is this relatively large rectangle, actually large triangle right here. So there's my consumer surplus. My producer surplus, area under the price and above the supply curve, is much smaller triangle down here. So there's my producer surplus. So here the consumer surplus is larger than the producer surplus. So there's no necessity for the two to be the same. Okay, drawing it there, drawing it here, it looks like they're the same, but that doesn't have to be the case. It is the case, though, that notice for all three of these, the total surplus is the sum of the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. So is that okay? Is that all right? Is that good? Well, let me ask now a question that sort of seems odd. Suppose that we don't produce the equilibrium quantity. Suppose we produce more than the equilibrium quantity, or suppose we produce less. And you might ask, well, wait, why would we do that? The equilibrium quantity is the amount that we produce. And I say, yeah, I know it. I know that. But let's just hang on. Let me shut my phone down here. Let's see, how can I stop this? Message, and then do this, and go, stop. She's not going to like that. Oops. But I'll call back in 6 minutes. Suppose I produce more, suppose I produce less. What happens in that case? And I'll show you in the second hour why we produce more, why we might produce less. What happens if less than the efficient quantity is produced? So let me come here. Here's a quantity, here's the price. Here's my demand equals my marginal social benefit. Here is my supply equals my marginal social cost. Here is the equilibrium quantity. That's also the allocatively efficient quantity. Suppose I produce less. Let's suppose I only produce this much right here. Let me call Q under. I'm underproducing. Okay, so I'm going to produce only up to this amount there. What happens in this case? What does my total surplus look like in this case? Well, I'm producing all of this right here, right? So I'm producing all of this. So my total surplus is going to be the difference between the marginal social benefit and the marginal social cost curves up to here. Okay, my total surplus is going to be that much right there. But I'm going to stop. I can't keep going because I'm not producing all the way to the efficient amount. Okay, I've stopped right here. So that means I lose some surplus. I'm producing none of these in here. So I've got none of these that I'm producing. And so here, I've got this deadweight loss. And let me actually write this out. This is called a deadweight loss. This is a loss of surplus. Nobody gets that surplus. Okay, it's not like this is surplus that goes to producers instead of consumers or consumers instead of producers. No, nobody gets it. It's just lost surplus. If we produce the efficient amount, our surplus would be this big triangle right in here. If we underproduce, if we only produce this, the total surplus is there of this trapezoid here. So what you can see is we're losing surplus. We're worse off if we underproduce. The economy is worse off. The total surplus, the total benefit minus cost is less if we underproduce than if we produce all the way out to the allocatively efficient amount. Okay, so this is showing us what happens if we produce less. What if we produce more? What if more than the efficient quantity was produced? Well, let's look here. Okay, so here. Quantity, price, demand, marginal social benefit, supply, marginal social cost. Here is the equilibrium quantity, same as the allocatively efficient quantity. Suppose we produce more. Let me call it Q over. We overproduce. So that means that we're going to be producing all of these in here. We produce all up to there. Let me do that again. Okay, so we produce all up to there. So on these units right here, look, I get my surplus. I get my nice triangular surplus right in here. So I get all the surplus on those units. But then, look, I keep on going. And each of these units over here is a loser unit. Each of these units has a marginal social cost that exceeds its marginal social benefit. So I lose this much right here. This is my deadweight loss if I overproduce. I've got to subtract from my total surplus. I've got to subtract from this green amount, whatever that is. I've got to subtract off that triangle right there. That, again, my total surplus is less. I have a deadweight loss because I've produced more. I've produced loser units, units that subtract from my total surplus. So what you can see from this, you're still saying, why are we producing more or less than the equilibrium amount? I say, well, just take it as a given. If we produce less, we have deadweight loss. We have less surplus. If we produce more, we have a deadweight loss. We have less surplus. Again, think of it as a mountain. Okay, this allocatively efficient amount, that's the peak of the mountain. Okay, if you go in either direction, you're going to have less surplus. So is that okay? You guys good with that? Is that okay? Okay, we'll take our break, come back. Actually, we'll start on the next chapter, and we'll see why you might produce less, or why you might produce less in the next chapter. So, Director, that's it.